Well, hello and good evening, everybody. I am Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where tonight, very soon, we should be getting on with the further adventures of three men in a boat, to say nothing of the dog. But first of all, let's do intros and greetings and stuff. How are we all? Is my mic a little quiet? It looks a little quiet. I'm just going to turn my gain up slightly. Let me know if I'm going too loud. Three men in a boat, the longest John story. Yeah, that checks out. That's good. I like it. A little quieter. Okay, yeah. Excuse me. Once again, I don't know how it happens. You can sit here all day doing whatever, and as soon as you open your mouth to start talking into a microphone, suddenly, oh yeah, we got a burp. Yeah, I'll sit here and talk for a bit. So I don't know. You say it's better. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit more. I don't think I should shout too much, but it's still looking low on the odd meter. There we go. That's a bit better. You spent most of the afternoon playing Power Wash Sim, and it's been very chill. Nice. I have watched two different streams this afternoon, both playing Power Wash Sim, the new SpongeBob expansion for it. That's Urban Bohemian and our good friend Stephen Kill. And frankly, it looks good. I've played Power Wash Sim a fair bit through Game Pass, so I know the deal. I know that it is a good time. But yeah, the SpongeBob expansion looks exactly on point. It's great. Wait, what? I feel like John should be a tiny bit more competent than ones in the book. No, maybe. Yeah. You spent the evening catching up with the story and have been thinking that the whole time. Ah, nice. Okay. Oh, so yeah, welcome in, Emsley. Good to see you. Welcome to the channel. And everybody else as well. How are you all? You can see at the top of chat already pinned is where the text and notes for where we are starting from. We'll be reading chapters 10 and 11 before the break, and 12 and 13 after the break, assuming obviously all goes well. No interruptions and whatnot. Not losing the butter by sitting on it. Yeah, they'd find another way. Ray Tracer, you just came from an early independence trade, and I'm going to say it my way, Lieutenant Governor gave everybody carrots. He's a carrot farmer. Alright, sick. Okay, well, everyone's got to have a hobby. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've got anything to talk about. Or if it's going to be another one of those where I just sit here and waffle for a few minutes, repeatedly saying, I don't know that I've got anything to talk about, and then I just read you a book. And if you consider to be a cat, not a dog, well, firstly, yes, correct, it will be a cat, not a dog, but just on that subject, well, maybe that sort of thing might be addressed in the story coming up today, who knows. Feels wrong to hear that pronunciation specifically talking about an Independence Day thing. That is why I foreshadowed it. Yes. Sound like you've had a funeral day, but overall good here? Oh, okay. I don't know if that's an expression or literally you've had a funeral today, in which case, my condolences. I'm sorry. I hope that everything's okay. And as well as things can be when you're attending a funeral. If not, and it is just an expression for something, which it could be, I don't know. You literally had a funeral. Cool. Okay, well, yeah, then say, I hope everything's okay. And that you and everyone around are well. And I'm sorry to hear that. Lucy, you think Robbie would have an issue with a cat? Yes, he would thoroughly object to taking probably any kind of pet on board. Yeah. What else do I have to say, really? I guess, what have we got coming up? Other things to talk about? Without sounding like I'm going to the end of the stream, we've got more of these streams as the week goes on. Lucy will be back on Wednesday with some stuff, probably some short stories, but that's a few days away. The next Chiliterati, I guess we should try and get on it for this month. Parola, yes, you'd feel better if your merch wasn't forgotten about and ignored. You complained about that enough in the Discord. Yeah, I saw that. I don't know what the situation is there. Firstly, yeah, I'm sorry that's going on. I know you're not like saying that here to try and get some kind of feedback or response from me, because you're just bringing it up because it's a grievance. But yeah, no, I saw that, and I don't know what help necessarily I can offer, because I'm assuming if you've complained about it to them, or sort of sent messages and stuff, that it should in theory be being handled to the best of their sandbag. Who put all the sandbags on top of your order? Right, yes. Yeah, like I can try and mention it to, kind of point it out to JD's attention later. Like, as I say, I'm assuming you've gone through the existing correct channels, which to the best of my knowledge do work and are effective. It's not just like a thing put there to try and placate people. But yeah, I'm really sorry you've been having a bad experience with that, and I hope it can get sorted. And I will try and mention it JD's way later, just in case it's something they're aware of, or something they can get a bit more information on, because obviously we don't want anyone to be having that kind of experience. And yeah, we're very sorry. Contact the sandbag on their help thing linked from the store. Okay. It's not something that I'm personally that involved with. Mostly if I see a problem like that, I'll direct it more the band's way and see if it's something they know about or can follow up with. They're the ones that handle that. But as I say, I'm very sorry. That sucks, and I hope that it can get sorted. I'll try and prompt some people. Lady Mephistopheles, hello, welcome. Good time zone to you. Been in contact with him, still feels mad. Yeah, absolutely. I've had that kind of experience from places, from various different things, up and down the scale of importance generally weighted by cost. I had some free prize. You don't pay for a prize. Some prize that I won. This is years ago. Just some random Twitter contest from a site that I think was outside Xbox actually. I won something from them, and I'm like, great, give us your address, we'll send it. And I did, and the thing went missing, and I just kind of was well, I don't know what to do about this, because if I chase them up about it, they're going to feel bad. So I guess my prize just went missing. Oh well. And just sort of accepted that. And then more recently, over the last few months, there was quite a sizable oh no, it wasn't the Nerf Gjallarhorn. It was a hoodie from Bungie, a Destiny 2 hoodie, which there just weren't any updates on it, because they do time limited things. It's hey, you unlocked this by playing this part of the game, so now you can buy a thing for a limited amount of time. And I've done that a few times, and one of them was a hoodie, and it just kind of seemed like it got lost in the system. And so yeah, I kind of kept checking and chasing up, and all the information was just vague. And I was kind of worrying for the longest time that it had just sort of been missed, and no communication back, or just kind of stock boilerplate. Here's a list of things. Did this help? No. Communication back sucks. So yeah, Occurs to me now, Andy Pants, he says, we can't check the Twitter at all without an account. Would it be possible to do an hour ahead reminder for Chiliteracy on Discord also? You're checking ahead to make sure it's going to happen. Yes. As you said, this is a perfect question to segue into something we were just discussing. Indeed. So, I guess probably actually scooting a Chiliterati up the order so we can actually have a more useful discussion about it. By which I mean it's better when Lucy's also available to use her voice rather than me being the host and holding the microphone here. But yes, with just fathomless business acumen of Elon Musk. Essentially not paying his bills and turning Twitter off for everybody. And the way that's all going today, Lucy and I have just been sort of having a brief discussion about what we should do, because frankly I'm looking for an exit for Twitter. I'm from Twitter, and I'm looking for a way to get the Johns probably off there too. I don't know. None of this is confirmed. Essentially what I'm doing is looking for a blue sky invite and hoping that I can get as many invites to give out to people to get over there too. Could always do a Chilliteracy on Monday. We did one just 2 weeks ago, didn't we? But yeah, I suppose you could bump it up the order. I mean, we run this channel. We can do more. We can do as many as we like. We could do it every day if we wanted. You've requested access for beta for Blue Sky. Yeah, I did that a while back, but I think they're giving it out by prioritizing invites from people rather than yeah. So we have been trying to figure out and think about where the best place to go is and what to do. And it seems like, I guess the available options are we make a Discord, which, if I'm honest, I'm personally a little bit reluctant to do because, funny you should say that, Josh. Another thing we were talking about, which I guess I'll get onto in a bit. We're not going to read a book tonight, by the way. What was I saying? Yeah, so possibly, maybe thinking about starting some kind of Chilliteracy Discord. I don't know, because firstly, it would mean another place for me to manage and admin, which, I don't know, it actually really getting stuck into that feels like a lot of work. It wouldn't be a very busy place, but I don't know, knowing what I'm like, I don't know how much time and energy I will be able to devote to running something like that, for instance, and keeping it all going. And I'd hate to kind of start something up and then just have it, atrophy. And yeah, I don't know how keen people would be to add yet another Discord server to their lists, because me already, I follow a lot. I'm active in one, maybe. Yeah. Andrew, you'd be happy to help with Discord management, and Lynn as well. Yeah, because that's the thing. I wouldn't. I don't know. I'd feel bad, effectively. I feel like I was palming that work off to someone else. But thank you for the volunteering. Oh, Josh, your brother got married. Hey, congratulations. Oh, you've got 2 days free before you're away from keyboard again. Neat. Okay. I will swap Street Fighter information with you so you can kick my ass. Great, we'll do that. But yeah, so we're thinking maybe a Discord, if people would actually want to join another Discord, for the purpose of books and things. I briefly was thinking maybe I make a Mastodon account or something for Chilliteracy so we can have that over there, or even make a whole ass server for it, but that feels like a lot of work. If I'm umming and ahhing over a Discord server, learning how to make a Mastodon server and then admin that feels like a lot of work. We are considering, it, to some degree, it doesn't exist yet, other than having the URL registered, but possibly just some kind of website, just a central site, for us to collect information, which would probably be just kind of a useful place to put stuff, put this kind of information as we have it. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like a conversation I should have started having it a little while back, but good conversation to have now and over the coming weeks, as we plan just some kind of escape from the hell site that is Twitter. It's a fun place that's also full of a lot of horrible people, and it's just it's just a shame that a complete arse has bought it and decided to run it into the ground. If there's got to be a server, you think Discord would be a good place. There's no need to learn anything. Yeah, that's fair. And if you were thinking the other day, Discord would be nice just to have some place to chat about what we're reading without taking over the books channel on Longest John's or Dave's server. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I've considered that as another thing, like carving out like a little niche in the John server or in Dave's server. But also, I know I'd feel like that was a bit of an imposition, kind of effectively giving that responsibility to the same mods and be like, hey, can you manage this space for me now too? And sort of leeching off one of those two wouldn't feel right. But yeah, like website-wise, as Lucy said, you sound like a central place for everyone to go to for links. So when something new comes up, you can just go there and look. Yeah. Discord would be nice for the arts and crafts gang. That's a good point. Yeah. His death clock was on overdrive once the muskrat bought it. Yeah, it's like I'm not gonna lie, it's been funny. Again, watching how the business masters do it, just fail faster than anyone thought. It's great. But frankly, I guess that's a conversation for another time. Website would be a good place to have things like the Bandcamp stuff, or even migrate that over to there. Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of stuff we could probably do with the website, which would just make things easier and feel a bit less fragmented, like having just like a central resource. But even if a Discord's free to make, having a Discord be part of that works just as well. It doesn't need to be a big Discord server, just announcements, general chat, book chat, and game chat. Yeah, a big comprehensive server in TLJ. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess I'm sort of. Yeah, I guess I'm doing the thing of like, oh, well, if it turns into a big thing and it's suddenly a whole new thing I have to work on and worry about and administrate. But yeah, if we might have to make a Discord. Yeah. I guess we can look into that. No, this is. I'm not like sad. I know what I'm like. I know what I'm like with work, and my problem is if I take on work and then I don't do it, and then someone else feels they have to do it, then I feel bad that I've not done the thing, and I feel bad that someone else is having to pick up my slack. I don't like either of these outcomes. Made a Discord back when you streamed a bit now and then. It's pretty much dead, but it's not doing any harm, just existing. Yeah, that's fair. I guess it's that worry of taking on another project and just like watching it decay. Like the number of like one post blogs that exist in the world, that's the thing that I think of, that I've started and that other people have started, where it's like, hey, this is my first post for this blog, I'm going to be updating this daily, where I talk about the things that I do and how my life is going. It's sort of like an online diary. And last post, June 17th 2014, and like that's I live in fear of that, because I do that a lot. Anyway, you can all carry on talking about that. I'm actually going to get on with the book. Lucky for me, I have a you. Yeah, but also, do you know how bad I feel when I like give you work to do? Because I feel really bad. You're actually busy and you do stuff. You like, Luce is the workhorse here. Luce is the one that actually gets things done. Yes, you take on the work, but also you take on the work. It's not an imposition where people volunteer. There is a big grey area in that statement. Anyway, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to carry on, because I've been here for 25 minutes already, and we've not even said a word about how these men got on. Before we start, a quick reminder of where we were, because finally, our trifecta, our glorious, they're just buffoons, complete shambling nincompoops. Let's go with that. They were sort of musing, like Jerome, or J as he abbreviates it to in this book sometimes. I guess it was like an old-fashioned thing. was musing about a time when he and some companion, a woman that he was boating with, kind of got a bit lost as they were looking for a lock and a place to pull over, boating out on a river one night. And it turned out they bumped into a bunch of Aries and Ariots, and were informed that the lock they were looking for had disappeared. Well, not disappeared, it's just gone. Been done away with for over a year, according to the one that was talking to him. There ain't no Wallingford lock now, so you're close to Cleve now, and so on. And so, yeah, that was sort of the story that he finished on last time. And I just mention this because Chapter 10, where we're going to start off, picks up with a continuation of that thought. So, there we go. Now that you are all aware of what we are going into, I shall treat myself to some water. Andy Pants, you threatening to make an unofficial Discord. Okay, Well, okay, what about a subreddit? No, I can't even get that one out. No, let's not think about that, because Reddit's going as well. Anyway, let's continue with 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. Chapter 10. Our first night. Under canvas. An appeal for help. Contrariness of tea kettles, how to overcome. Supper. How to feel virtuous. Wanted, a comfortably appointed, well-drained desert island neighbourhood of South Pacific Ocean preferred. Funny thing that happened to George's father. A restless night. Harris and I began to think that Bell Weir Lock must have been done away with after the same manner. George had towed us up to Staines, and we had taken the boat from there, and it seemed that we were dragging 50 tons after us, and were walking 40 miles. It was 7:30 when we were through, and we all got in and sculled up close to the left bank, looking for a spot to haul up in. We had originally intended to go on to Magna Charta Island, a sweetly pretty part of the river where it winds through a soft green valley, and to camp in one of the many picturesque inlets to be found round that tiny shore. But somehow we did not feel that we yearned for the picturesque nearly so much now as we had earlier in the day. A bit of water between a coal barge and a gasworks would have quite satisfied us for that night. We did not want scenery. We wanted to have our supper and go to bed. However, we did pull up to the point, Picnic Point, it is called, and dropped into a very pleasant nook under a great elm tree, to the spreading roots of which we fastened the boats. Then we thought we were going to have supper. We had dispensed with tea so as to save time, but George said no, that we had better get the canvas up first before it got quite dark, and while we could see what we were doing. Then, he said, all our work would be done, and we could sit down to eat with an easy mind. The canvas wanted more putting up than I think any of us had bargained for. It looked so simple in the abstract. You took 5 iron arches, like gigantic croquet hoops, and fitted them up over the boat, and then stretched the canvas over them, and fastened it down. It would take quite 10 minutes, we thought. That was an underestimate. We took up the hoops, and began to drop them into the sockets placed for them. You would not imagine this to be dangerous work, but looking back now, the wonder to me is that any of us are alive to tell the tale. They were not hoops, they were demons. First, they would not fit into their sockets at all, and we had to jump on them, and kick them, and hammer at them with the boat hook. And when they were in, it turned out that they were the wrong hoops for those particular sockets, and they had to come out again. But they would not come out, until 2 of us had gone and struggled with them for 5 minutes, when they would jump up suddenly, and try to throw us into the water, and drown us. They had hinges in the middle, and, when we were not looking, they nipped us with these hinges in delicate parts of the body. And, while we were wrestling with one side of the hoop, and endeavouring to persuade it to do its duty, the other side would come behind us in a cowardly manner and hit us over the head. We got them fixed at last, and then all that was to be done was to arrange the covering over them. George unrolled it, and fastened one end over the nose of the boat. Harris stood in the middle to take it from George and roll it onto me, and I kept by the stern to receive it. It was a long time coming down to me. George did his part all right, but it was new work to Harris, and he bungled it. How he managed it I do not know, he could not explain himself, but by some mysterious process or other he succeeded, after 10 minutes of superhuman effort, in getting himself completely rolled up in it. He was so firmly wrapped round and tucked in and folded over that he could not get out. He, of course, made frantic struggles for freedom, the birthright of every Englishman, and in doing so, I learned this afterwards, knocked over George. And then George, swearing at Harris, began to struggle too, and got himself entangled and rolled up. I knew nothing about all this at the time. I did not understand the business at all myself. I had been told to stand where I was and wait till the canvas came to me, and Montmorency and I stood there and waited, both as good as gold. We could see the canvas being violently jerked and tossed about, pretty considerably, but we supposed this was part of the method, and did not interfere. We also heard much smothered language coming from underneath it, and we guessed that they were finding the job rather troublesome, and concluded that we would wait until things had got a little simpler before we joined in. We waited some time, but matters seemed to get only more and more involved, until at last George's head came wriggling out over the side of the boat and spoke up. It said, "Give us a hand here, can't you, you cuckoo? Standing there like a stuffed mummy when you can see we are both being suffocated, you dummy." I could never withstand an appeal for help, so I went and undid them, not before it was time either, for Harris was nearly black in the face. It took us half an hour's hard labour after that before it was properly up, and then we cleared the decks and got out supper. We put the kettle on to boil up in the nose of the boat, and went down to the stern and pretended to take no notice of it, but set to work to get the other things out. That is the only way to get a kettle to boil up the river. If it sees that you are waiting for it and are anxious, it will never even sing. You have to go away and begin your meal, as if you are not going to have any tea at all. You must not even look round at it. Then you will soon hear it sputtering away, mad to be made into tea. It is a good plan, too, if you are in a great hurry, to talk very loudly to each other about how you don't need any tea and are not going to have any. You get near the kettle so that it can overhear you, and then you shout, "I don't want any tea, do you, George?" To which George shouts back, "Oh no, I don't like tea. We'll have lemonade instead. Tea's so indigestible." Upon which the kettle boils over and puts the stove out. We adopted this harmless bit of trickery, and the result was that, by the time everything else was ready, the tea was waiting. Then we lit the lantern and squatted down to supper. We wanted that supper. For 35 minutes not a sound was heard throughout the length and breadth of that boat, save the clank of cutlery and crockery and the steady grinding of 4 sets of molars. At the end of 35 minutes Harris said, "Ah," and took his left leg out from under him and put his right one there instead. 5 minutes afterwards George said, "Ah," too, and threw his plate out on the bank. And 3 minutes later than that, Montmorency gave the first sign of contentment he had exhibited since we had started, and rolled over on his side and spread his legs out. And then I said, "Ah," and bent my head back, and bumped it against one of the hoops, but I did not mind it. I did not even swear. How good one feels when one is full. How satisfied with ourselves and with the world. People who have tried it tell me that a clear conscience makes you very happy and contented, but a full stomach does the business quite as well, and is cheaper, and more easily obtained. One feels so forgiving and generous after a substantial and well-digested meal, so noble-minded, so kindly-hearted. It is very strange, this domination of our intellect by our digestive organs. We cannot work, we cannot think unless our stomach wills so. It dictates to us our emotions, our passions. After eggs and bacon, it says, work. After beefsteak and porter, it says, sleep. After a cup of tea, 2 spoonfuls for each cup, and don't let it stand more than 3 minutes, it says to the brain, now, rise and show your strength. Be eloquent and deep and tender. See with a clear eye into nature and into life. Spread your white wings of quivering thought, and soar, a godlike spirit, over the whirling world beneath you, up through long lanes of flaming stars to the gates of eternity. After hot muffins, it says, be dull and soulless like a beast of the field, a brainless animal with listless eye, unlit by any ray of fancy or of hope or fear or love or life. And after brandy, taken in sufficient quantity, it says, now, come, fool, grin and tumble that your fellow men may laugh, drivel in folly, and splutter in senseless sounds, and show what a helpless ninny is the poor man whose wit and will are drowned like kittens side by side in half an inch of alcohol. We are but the veriest, sorriest slaves of our stomach. Reach not after morality and righteousness, my friends. Watch vigilantly your stomach, and diet it with care and judgment. Then virtue and contentment will come and reign within your heart, unsought by any effort of your own, and you will be a good citizen, a loving husband and a tender father, a noble, pious man. Before our supper, Harris and George and I were quarrelsome and snappy and ill-tempered. After our supper, we sat and beamed on one another, and we beamed upon the dog too. We loved each other. We loved everybody. Harris, in moving about, trod on George's corn. Had this happened before supper, George would have expressed wishes and desires concerning Harris's fate in this world and the next, that would have made a thoughtful man shudder. As it was, he said, "Steady, old man, wear wheat." And Harris, instead of merely observing, in his most unpleasant tones, that a fellow could hardly help treading on some bit of George's foot, if he had to move about at all within 10 yards of where George was sitting, suggesting that George never ought to come into an ordinary-sized boat with feet that length, and advising him to hang them over the side, as he would have done before supper, now said, "Oh, I'm sorry, old chap, I hope I haven't hurt you." And George said, "Not at all," that it was his fault, and Harris said no, it was his. It was quite pretty to hear them. We lit our pipes and sat looking out on the quiet night and talked. George said, why could not we be always like this, away from the world with its sins and temptation, leading sober, peaceful lives and doing good? I said it was the sort of thing I had often longed for myself, and we discussed the possibility of our going away, we four, to some handy, well-fitted desert island, and living there in the woods. Harris said that the danger about desert islands, as far as he had heard, was that they were so damp, but George said no, not if properly drained. And then we got on to drains, and that put George in mind of a very funny thing that happened to his father once. He said his father was travelling with another fellow through Wales, and one night they stopped at a little inn, where there were some other fellows, and they joined the other fellows and spent the evening with them. They had a very jolly evening, and sat up late, and by the time they came to go to bed, this was when George's father was a very young man, were slightly jolly too. They, George's father and George's father's friend, were to sleep in the same room, but in different beds. They took the candle and went up. The candle lurched up against the wall when they got into the room and went out, and they had to undress and grope into bed in the dark. This they did, but instead of getting into separate beds as they thought they were doing, they both climbed into the same one without knowing it, one getting in with his head at the top, and the other crawling in from the opposite side of the compass and lying with his feet on the pillow. There was silence for a moment, and then George's father said, "Joe." "What's the matter, Tom?" replied Joe's voice from the other end of the bed. "Why, there's a man in my bed," said George's father. "Here's his feet on my pillow." "Well, it's an extraordinary thing, Tom," answered the other, "but I'm blessed if there isn't a man in my bed too." "What are you going to do?" asked George's father. "Well, I'm going to chuck him out," replied Joe. "So am I," said George's father valiantly. There was a brief struggle, followed by 2 heavy bumps on the floor, and then a rather doleful voice said, "I say, Tom." "Yes? How have you got on?" "Well, to say to you the truth, my man's chucked me out." "So's mine. I say, I don't think much of this inn, do you?" "What was the name of that inn?" said Harris. "The Pig and Whistle," said George. "Why?" "Ah, no, then it isn't the same," replied Harris. "What do you mean?" queried George. "Why, it's so curious," murmured Harris, "but precisely that very same thing happened to my father once at a country inn. I've often heard him tell the tale. I thought it might have been the same inn." We turned in at 10 that night, and I thought I should sleep well, being tired. But I didn't. As a rule, I undress and put my head on the pillow, and then somebody bangs at the door and says it is 8:30. But tonight everything seemed against me. The novelty of it all, the hardness of the boat, the cramped position. I was lying with my feet under one seat and my head on another. The sound of the lapping water round the boat and the wind among the branches kept me restless and disturbed. I did get to sleep for a few hours, and then some part of the boat, which seemed to have grown up in the night, for it certainly was not there when we started, and it had disappeared by the morning, kept digging into my spine. I slept through it for a while, dreaming that I had swallowed a sovereign and that they were cutting a hole in my back with a gimlet, so as to try and get it out. I thought it very unkind of them, and I told them I would owe them the money, and they should have it by the end of the month. But they would not hear of that, and said it would be much better if they had it then, because otherwise the interest would accumulate so. I got quite cross with them after a bit, and told them what I thought of them, and then they gave the gimlet such an excruciating wrench that I woke up. The boat seemed stuffy, and my head ached, so I thought I would step out into the cool night air. I slipped on what clothes I could find about, some of my own and some of George's and Harris's, and crept under the canvas onto the bank. It was a glorious night. The moon had sunk and left the quiet earth alone with the stars. It seemed as if the silence and the hush, while we, her children, slept, they were talking with her, their sister, conversing of mighty mysteries in voices too vast and deep for childish human ears to catch the sound. They awe us, these strange stars, so cold, so clear. We are as children whose small feet have strayed into some dim-lit temple of the god they have been taught to worship but know not. And, standing where the echoing dome spans the long vista of the shadowy light, glance up, half hoping, half afraid to see some awful vision hovering there. And yet it seems so full of comfort and of strength, the night. In its great presence our small sorrows creep away, ashamed. The day has been so full of fret and care, and our hearts have been so full of evil and of bitter thoughts, and the world has seemed so hard and wrong to us. Then night, like some great loving mother, gently lays her hand upon our fevered head, and turns our little tear-stained face up to hers, and smiles, and, though she does not speak, we know what she would say, and lay our hot flushed cheek against her bosom, and the pain is gone. Sometimes our pain is very deep and real, and we stand before her very silent, because there is no language for our pain, only a moan. Night's heart is full of pity for us. She cannot ease our aching. She takes our hand in hers, and the little world grows very small and very far beneath us, and, borne on her dark wings, we pass for a moment into a mightier presence than her own, and in the wondrous light of that great presence all human life lies like a book before us, and we know that pain and sorrow are but the angels of God. Only those who have worn the crown of suffering can look upon that wondrous light, and they, when they return, may not speak of it or tell the mystery they know. Once upon a time, through a strange country there rode some goodly knights, and their path lay by a deep wood, where tangled briars grew very thick and strong, and tore the flesh of them that lost their way therein. And the leaves of the trees that grew in the wood were very dark and thick, so that no ray of light came through the branches to lighten the gloom and sadness. And, as they passed by that dark wood, one knight of those that rode, missing his comrades, wandered far away, and returned to them no more. And they, sorely grieving, rode on without him, mourning him as one dead. Now, when they reached the fair castle towards which they had been journeying, they stayed there many days, and made merry. And one night, as they sat in cheerful ease around the logs that burned in the great hall, and drank a loving measure, there came the comrade they had lost, and greeted them. His clothes were ragged, like a beggar's, and many sad wounds were on his sweet flesh, but upon his face there shone a great radiance of deep joy. And they questioned him, asking him what had befallen him. And he told them how in the dark wood he had lost his way, and had wandered many days and nights, till, torn and bleeding, he had lain him down to die. Then, when he was nigh unto death, lo! Through the savage gloom there came to him a stately maiden, and took him by the hand, and led him on through devious paths, unknown to any man, until upon the darkness of the wood there dawned a light such as the light of day was unto, but as a little lamp unto the sun. And in that wondrous light our wayworn knight saw as in a dream, a vision, and so glorious, so fair the vision seemed, that of his bleeding wounds he thought no more, but stood as one entrained, whose joy is deep as in the sea, whereof no man can tell the depth. And the vision faded, and the knight, kneeling upon the ground, thanked the good saint who into that sad wood had strayed his steps, so that he had seen the vision that lay there hid. And the name of the dark forest was Sorrow, but of the vision that good knight saw therein we may not speak nor tell. Chapter 11. How George, once upon a time, got up early in the morning. George, Harris, and Montmorency do not like the look of the cold water. Heroism and determination on the part of Jerome. George and his shirt, story with a moral. Harris as cook. Historical retrospect, specially inserted for the use of schools. I woke at 6 the next morning and found George awake too. We both turned round and tried to go to sleep again, but we could not. Had there been any particular reason why we should not have gone to sleep again, but have got up and dressed then and there, we should have dropped off while we were looking at our watches and have slept till 10. As there was no earthly necessity for our getting up under another 2 hours at the very least, and our getting up at that time was an utter absurdity, it was only in keeping with the natural cussedness of things in general that we should both feel that lying down for 5 minutes more would be death to us. George said that the same kind of thing, only worse, had happened to him some 18 months ago when he was lodging by himself in the house of a certain Mrs. Gippings. He said his watch went wrong one evening and stopped at 8:15. He did not know this at the time because, for some reason or other, he forgot to wind it up when he went to bed, an unusual occurrence with him, and hung it up over his pillow without ever looking at the thing. It was in the winter when this happened, very near the shortest day, and a week of fog into the bargain, so the fact that it was still very dark when George woke in the morning was no guide to him as to the time. He reached up and hauled down his watch. It was 8:15. "Angels and ministers of grace defend us!" exclaimed George. "And here have I got to be in the city by 9. Why didn't somebody call me? Oh, this is a shame!" And he flung the watch down and sprang out of bed and had a cold bath and washed himself and dressed himself and shaved himself in cold water because there was not time to wait for the hot, and then rushed and had another look at the watch. Whether the shaking it had received in being thrown down on the bed had started it, or how it was, George could not say, but certain it was that from 8:15 it had begun to go, and now pointed at 20 minutes to 9. George snatched it up and rushed downstairs. In the sitting-room all was dark and silent. There was no fire, no breakfast. George said it was a wicked shame of Mrs. G, and he made his mind up to tell her what he thought of her when he came home in the evening. Then he dashed on his greatcoat and hat, and, seizing his umbrella, made for the front door. The door was not even unbolted. George anathematized Mrs. G for a lazy old woman, and thought it was very strange that people could not get up at a decent, respectable time, unlocked and unbolted the door, and ran out. He ran hard for 1/4 of a mile, and at the end of that distance it began to be borne in upon him as a strange and curious thing that there were so few people about, and that there were no shops open. It was certainly a very dark and foggy morning, but still it seemed an unusual course to stop all business on that account. He had to go to business. Why should other people stop in bed merely because it was dark and foggy? At length he reached Holborn. Not a shutter was down. Not a bus was about. There were 3 men in sight, one of whom was a policeman, a market cart full of cabbages, and a dilapidated-looking cab. George pulled his watch and looked at it. It was 5 minutes to 9. He stood still and counted his pulse. He stooped down and felt his legs. Then, with his watch still in hand, he went up to the policeman and asked him if he knew what time it was. "What's the time?" said the man, eyeing George up and down with evident suspicion. "Why, if you listen, you will hear it strike." George listened, and a neighbouring clock immediately obliged. "But it's only gone 3, said George, in an injured tone when it had finished. "Well, how many did you want it to go?" replied the constable. "Why, 9, said George, showing his watch. "Do you know where you live?" said the guardian of public order severely. George thought, and gave the address. "Oh, that's where it is it?" replied the man. "Well, you take my advice and go there quietly, and take that watch of yours with you, and don't let's have any more of it." And George went home again, musing as he walked along, and let himself in. At first, when he got in, he determined to undress and go to bed again. But when he thought of the redressing and rewashing, and the having of another bath, he determined he would not, but would sit up and go to sleep in the easy-chair. But he could not get to sleep. He never felt more wakeful in his life. So he lit the lamp and got out the chessboard and played himself a game of chess. But even that did not enliven him. It seemed slow somehow. So he gave the chess up and tried to read. He did not seem able to take any sort of interest in reading either, so he put on his coat again and went out for a walk. It was horribly lonesome and dismal, and all the policemen he met regarded him with undisguised suspicion, and turned their lanterns on him and followed him about, and this had such an effect upon him at last that he began to feel as if he really had done something, and he got to slinking down the by-streets and hiding in dark doorways when he heard the regulation flip-flop approaching. Of course, this conduct made the force only more distrustful of him than ever, and they would come and rout him out, and ask him what he was doing there, and when he answered, "Nothing," he had merely come out for a stroll. It was then 4 o'clock in the morning. They looked as though they did not believe him, and 2 plain-clothes constables came home with him to see if he really did live where he had said he did. They saw him go in with his key, and then they took up a position opposite and watched his house. He thought he would light a fire when he got inside and make himself some breakfast just to pass away the time, but he did not seem able to handle anything from a scuttleful of coals to a teaspoon without dropping it or falling over it, and making such a noise that he was in mortal fear that he would wake Mrs. G up, and that she would think it was burglars and open the window and call, "Police!" and then these 2 detectives would rush in and handcuff him and march him off to the police court. He was in a morbidly nervous state by this time, and he pictured the trial, and his trying to explain the circumstances to the jury, and nobody believing him, and his being sentenced to 20 years penal servitude, and his mother dying of a broken heart. So he gave up trying to get breakfast, and wrapped himself up in his overcoat, and sat in the easy chair till Mrs. G came down at 7:30. He said he had never got up too early since that morning. It had been such a warning to him. We had been sitting huddled up in our rugs while George had been telling me this true story, and on his finishing it I set to work to wake up Harris with a skull. The 3rd prod did it, and he turned over on the other side and said he would be down in a minute and that he would have his lace-up boots. We soon let him know where he was, however, by the aid of the hitcher, and he sat up suddenly, sending Montmorency, who had been sleeping the sleep of the just, right in the middle of his chest, sprawling across the boat. Then we pulled up the canvas, and all 4 of us poked our head over the offside and looked down at the water, and shivered. The idea, overnight, had been that we should get up early in the morning, fling off our rugs and shawls, and, throwing back the canvas, spring into the river with a joyous shout, and revel in a long, delicious swim. Somehow, now the morning had come, the notion seemed less tempting. The water looked damp and chilly. The wind felt cold. "Well, who's going to be first in?" said Harris at last. There was no rush for precedence. George settled the matter so far as he was concerned by retiring into the boat and pulling on his socks. Montmorency gave vent to an involuntary howl, as if merely thinking of the thing had given him the horrors. And Harris said it would be so difficult to get into the boat again, and went back and sorted out his trousers. I did not altogether like to give in, though I did not relish the plunge. There might be snags about, or weeds, I thought. I meant to compromise matters by going down to the edge and just throwing the water over myself. So I took a towel and crept out on the bank, and wormed my way along onto the branch of a tree that dipped down into the water. It was bitterly cold. The wind cut like a knife. I thought I would not throw the water over myself after all. I would go back into the boat and dress, and I turned to do so. And as I turned, the silly branch gave way, and I and the towel went in together with a tremendous splash, and I was out midstream with a gallon of Thames water inside me before I knew what had happened. "By Jove, old Jay's gone in," I heard Harris say as I came blowing to the surface. "I didn't think he'd have the pluck to do it, did you?" "Is it all right?" sung out George. "Lovely," I spluttered back. You were duff as not to come in. I wouldn't have missed this for worlds. Why don't you try it? It only wants a little determination." But I could not persuade them. Rather an amusing thing happened while dressing that morning. I was very cold when I got back into the boat, and, in my hurry to get my shirt on, I accidentally jerked it into the water. It made me awfully wild, especially as George burst out laughing. I could not see anything to laugh at, and I told George so, and he only laughed the more. I never saw a man laugh so much. I quite lost my temper with him at last, and I pointed out to him what a drivelling maniac of an imbecile idiot he was, but he only roared the louder. And then, Just as I was landing the shirt, I noticed that it was not my shirt at all, but George's, which I had mistaken for mine. Whereupon the humour of the thing struck me for the first time, and I began to laugh. And the more I looked from George's wet shirt to George roaring with laughter, the more I was amused, and I laughed so much that I had to let the shirt fall back into the water again. "Aren't you? You going to get it out?" said George between his shrieks. I could not answer him at all for a while. I was laughing so, but at last, between my peals, I managed to jerk out, "It isn't my shirt, it's yours." I never saw a man's face change from lively to severe so suddenly in all my life before. "What?" he yelled, springing up. "You silly cuckoo, why can't you be more careful what you're doing? Why the deuce don't you go and dress on the bank? You're not fit to be in a boat, you're not. Give me the hitcher." I tried to make him see the fun of the thing, but he could not. George is very dense at seeing a joke sometimes. Harris proposed that we should have scrambled eggs for breakfast. He said he would cook them. It seemed from his account that he was very good at doing scrambled eggs. He often did them at picnics when out on yachts. He was quite famous for them. People who had once tasted his scrambled eggs, so we gathered from his conversation, never cared for any other food afterwards, but pined away and died when they could not get them. It made our mouths water to hear him talk about the things, and we handed him out the stove and the frying pan and all the eggs that had not smashed and gone over everything in the hamper, and begged him to begin. He had some trouble in breaking the eggs, or rather not so much trouble in breaking them exactly as in getting them into the frying pan when broken, and keeping them off his trousers, and preventing them from running up his sleeve. But he fixed some 6 into the pan at last, and then squatted down by the side of the stove and chivied them about with a fork. It seemed harassing work so far as George and I could judge. Whenever he went near the pan, he burned himself, and then he would drop everything and dance around the stove, flicking his fingers about and cursing the things. Indeed, every time George and I looked round at him, he was sure to be performing this feat. We thought at first that it was a necessary part of the culinary arrangement. We did not know what scrambled eggs were, and we fancied that it must be some Native American or Sandwich Island sort of dish that required dances and incantations for its proper cooking. Montmorency went up and put his nose over it once, and the fat spluttered up and scolded him, and then he began dancing and cursing. Altogether, it was one of the most interesting and exciting operations I have ever witnessed. George and I were both quite sorry when it was over. The result was not altogether the success that Harris had anticipated. There seemed so little to show for the business. 6 eggs had gone into the frying pan, and all that came out was a teaspoonful of burnt and unappetizing-looking mess. Harris said it was the fault of the frying pan, and thought it would have gone better if we had had a fish kettle and a gas stove, and we decided not to attempt the dish again until we had those aids to housekeeping by us. The sun had got more powerful by the time we had finished breakfast, and the wind had dropped, and it was as lovely a morning as one could desire. Little was in sight to remind us of the 19th century, and as we looked out upon the river in the morning sunlight, we could almost fancy that the centuries between us and that ever-to-be-famous June morning of 1215 had been drawn aside, and that we, English yeomen's sons in homespun cloth, with dirk at belt, were waiting there to witness the writing of that stupendous page of history, the meaning whereof was to be translated to the common people some 400 and odd years later by one Oliver Cromwell, who had deeply studied it. It is a fine summer morning, sunny, soft, and still. But through the air there runs a thrill of coming stir. King John had slept at Duncroft Hall, and all the day before the little town of Staines had echoed to the clang of armed men and the clatter of great horses over its rough stones, and the shouts of captains, and the grim oaths and surly jests of bearded bowmen, billmen, pikemen, and strange-speaking foreign spearmen. Gay-cloaked companies of knights and squires have ridden in, all travel-stained and dusty. And all the evening long the timid townsmen's doors have had to be quick opened to let in rough groups of soldiers, for whom there must be found both board and lodging, and the best of both, or woe betide the house and all within. For the sword is judge and jury, plaintiff and executioner in these tempestuous times, and pays for what it takes by sparing those from whom it takes it, if it pleases it to do so. Round the campfire in the market-place gather still more of the Baron's troops, and eat and drink deep, and bellow forth roistering, drinking songs, and gambol and quarrel as the evening grows and deepens into night. The firelight sheds quaint shadows on their piled-up arms and on their uncouth forms. The children of the town steal round to watch them, wondering, and brawny country wenches, laughing, draw near to bandy alehouses, jest and jibe with the swaggering troops, so unlike the village swains, who, now despised, stand apart behind, with vacant grins upon their broad, peering faces. And out from the fields around glitter the faint lights of more distant camps, as here some great lord's followers lie mustered, and there false John French's mercenaries hover like crouching wolves without the town. And so, with sentinels in each dark street, and twinkling watchfires on each height around, the night has worn away, and over this fair valley of old Thames has broken the morning of the great day that is to close so big with the fate of ages yet unborn. Ever since grey dawn, in the lower of the two islands just above where we are standing, there has been great clamour and the sound of many workmen. The great pavilion brought there yester-eve is being raised, and carpenters are busy nailing tiers of seats, while prentices from London town are there with many-coloured stuffs, and silk and cloth of gold and silver. And now, lo! Down upon the road that winds along the river's bank from Staines, there come towards us, laughing and talking together in a deep guttural bass, a score of stalwart halbert men, Baron's men these, and halt at 100 yards or so above us, on the other bank, and lean upon their arms, and wait. And so, from hour to hour, march up along the road ever fresh groups and bands of armed men, their casques and breastplates flashing back along the long, low lines of morning sunlight, until, as far as the eye can reach, the way seems thick with glittering steel and prancing steeds, and shouting horsemen are galloping from group to group, and little banners are fluttering lazily in the warm breeze, and every now and then there is a deeper stir as the ranks make way on either side, and some great baron on his war-horse, with his guard of squires around him, passes along to take his station at the head of his serfs and vassals. And up the slope of Cooper's Hill, just opposite, are gathered the wondering rustics and curious townsfolk, who have run from Staines and none are quite sure what the bustle is about, but each one has a different version of the great event that they have come to see. And some say that much good to all the people will come from this day's work, but the old men shake their heads, for they have heard such tales before. And all the river down to Staines is dotted with small craft and boats and tiny coracles, which last are growing out of favour now and are only used by the poorer folk. Over the rapids, where in after years trim Belweir Lock will stand, they have been forced or dragged by their sturdy rowers, and are now crowding up as near as they dare come to the great covered barges, which lie in readiness to bear King John to where the fateful charter waits his signing. It is noon, and we and all the people have been waiting patient for many an hour, and the rumour has run around that Slippery John has again escaped from the Baron's grasp, and has stolen away from Duncroft Hall with his mercenaries at his heels, and will soon be doing other work than signing charters for his people's liberty. Not so. This time the grip upon him has been one of iron, and he had slid and wriggled in vain. Far down the road a little cloud of dust has risen, and draws near, and grows louder. Then the pattering of many hoofs grows louder, and in and out between the scattered groups of drawn-up men there pushes on its way a brilliant cavalcade of gay-dressed lords and knights. And front and rear and either flank there ride the yeomen of the barons, and in the midst King John. He rides to where the barges lie in readiness, and the great barons step forth from their ranks to meet him. He greets them with a smile and a laugh and a pleasant honeyed words, as though it was some feast in his honour to which he had been invited. But as he rises to dismount, he casts one hurried glance from his own French mercenaries drawn up in the rear to the grim ranks of the baron's men that hem him in. Is it too late? One fierce blow at the unsuspecting horseman at his side, one cry to his French troops, one desperate charge upon the unready lines before him, and these rebellious barons might rue the day they dared to thwart his plans. A bolder hand might have turned the game even at that point. Had it been a Richard there, the cup of liberty might have been dashed from England's lips, and the taste of freedom held back for 100 years. But the heart of King John sinks before the stern faces of the English fighting men, and the arm of King John drops back onto his rein, and he dismounts and takes his seat in the foremost barge. And the barons follow in, with each mailed hand upon the sword hilt, and the word is given to let go. Slowly the heavy, bright-decked barges leave the shore of Runnymede. Slowly against the swift current they work their ponderous way, till, with a low grumble, they grate against the bank of the little island that from this day will bear the name of Magna Charta Island. And King John has stepped upon the shore, and we wait in breathless silence till a great shout cleaves the air, and the great cornerstone in England's Temple of Liberty has, now we know, been firmly laid. And that dramatic paragraph brings us to the end of the chapter, and where we shall take a break for tonight. So, I will see you back here in about 5 minutes or so. You know what to do. Stretches, fluid rotations, anything else you want to do in 5 minutes. It's your call. But I will see you back then. Goodbye for now. And we're back. Hello, and welcome back. I hope that everyone is enjoying it so far, and, you know, it's had a successful break. I'll, you know, talk for a sec and let people filter back in. Lynn, you're listening while beating, then you actually hear a sentence and think, wait, how the hell did we get here? Yes, that is how Jerome chooses to narrate these things. You may have figured by now, he is a profoundly easily distracted man. The tangents are indeed getting more ridiculous. I was saying to Lucy, like in the break, we were just chatting, that like the last bit, the whole lengthy diatribe on the Magna Carta, I don't yet know the point of that one, but what he does seem to do is, like, in one chapter, we'll just go off on a really long tangent about something, and then sometimes not pay that off for a long time to come. Because there was the earlier one about the knight getting lost in the woods and, you know, getting separated from his friends and then showing up later, and that whole kind of slightly mystical angelic saga, which I'm pretty sure, now that I've kind of having like read ahead and reading back again through and stuff like that, I think it does pay off, which, you know, because there's been a break and I'm just kind of foreshadowing that a little bit, but I think there's a bit of a payoff to that one. I guess the other note that I want to just set up for this one, for those of you aware of it, that have ever watched I can't actually remember the name, I guess it was just the Mitchell and Webb show. I left a note to myself, and I don't remember the event that's coming up, but I just left a note, Sir Digby Chicken Caesar. There is a bit that I think just gets a little bit Sir Digby Chicken Caesar. If that means anything to you, great, look out for that. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It's fine, it's very good. But yes, where are we? Let us continue. Trusting, of course, that everybody is okay. Let us continue with Chapter 12. Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Disadvantages of living in same house with pair of lovers. A trying time for the English nation. A night search for the picturesque. Homeless and houseless. Harris prepares to die. An angel comes along. Effect of sudden joy on Harris. A little supper. Lunch. High price for mustard. A fearful battle. Maidenhead. Sailing. 3 fishes. We are cursed. I was sitting on the bank, conjuring up this scene to myself, when George remarked that when I was quite rested, perhaps I would not mind helping to wash up, and, thus recalled from the days of the glorious past to the prosaic present, with all its misery and sin, I slid down into the boat and cleaned out the frying pan with a stick of wood and a tuft of grass, polishing it up finally with George's wet shirt. We went over to Magna Charta Island, and had a look at the stone which stands in the cottage there, and on which the Great Charter is said to have been signed. Though, as to whether it really was signed there, or, as some say, on the other bank at Runnymede, I decline to commit myself. As far as my own personal opinion goes, however, I am inclined to give weight to the popular island theory. Certainly, had I been one of the barons at the time, I should have strongly urged upon my comrades the advisability of our getting such a slippery customer as King John onto the island, where there was less chance of surprises and tricks. There are the ruins of an old priory in the grounds of Ankerwyck House, which is close to Picnic Point, and it was round about the grounds of this old priory that Henry VIII is said to have waited for and met Anne Boleyn. He also used to meet her at Hever Castle in Kent, and also somewhere near St Albans. It must have been difficult for the people of England in those days to have found a spot where these thoughtless young folk were not spooning. Have you ever been in a house where there are a couple courting? It is most trying. You think you will go and sit in the drawing-room, and you march off there, As you open the door, you hear a noise, as if somebody had suddenly recollected something, and when you get in, Emily is over by the window, full of interest in the opposite side of the road, and your friend, John Edward, is at the other end of the room, and his whole soul held in thrall by photographs of other people's relatives. "Oh," you say, pushing at the door, "I didn't know anybody was here." "Oh, didn't you?" says Emily, coldly, in a tone which implies that she does not believe you. You hang out for a bit. Then you say, "It's very dark. Why don't you light the gas?" John Edward says, "Oh, he hadn't noticed it," and Emily says that Papa does not like the gas lit in the afternoon. You tell them one or two items of news and give them your views and opinions on the Irish question, but this does not appear to interest them. All they remark on any subject is, "Oh, is it? Did he? Yes, and you don't say so." And after 10 minutes of such style of conversation, you edge up to the door and slip out, and are surprised to find that the door immediately closes behind you and shuts itself without your having touched it. Half an hour later, you think you will try a pipe in the conservatory. The only chair in the place is occupied by Emily, and John Edward, if the language of clothes can be relied upon, has evidently been sitting on the floor. They do not speak, but they give you a look that says all that can be said in a civilized community, and you back out promptly and shut the door behind you. You are afraid to poke your nose into any room in the house now, so, after walking up and down the stairs for a while, you go and sit in your own bedroom. This becomes uninteresting, however, after a time, and so you put on your hat and stroll out into the garden. You walk down the path, and as you pass the summer house you glance in, and there are those two young idiots huddled up into one corner of it, and they see you, and are evidently under the idea that, for some wicked purpose of your own, you are following them about. "Why don't they have a special room for this sort of thing, and make people keep to it?" you mutter, and you rush back to the hall and get your umbrella, and go out. It must have been much like this when that foolish boy Henry VIII was courting his little Anne. People in Buckinghamshire would have come upon them unexpectedly when they were mooning around Windsor and Wraysbury, and have exclaimed, "Oh, you here?" And Henry would have blushed and said yes, he had just come over to see a man, and Anne would have said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you, isn't it funny? I've just met Mr. Henry VIII in the lane, and he's going the same way as I am." Then those people would have gone away and said to themselves, "Oh, we'd better get out of here while this billing and cooing is going on. We'll go down to Kent." And they would go down to Kent, and the first thing they would see in Kent when they got there would be Henry and Anne fooling around Hever Castle. "Oh, drat this," they would have said. "Here, let's go away. I can't stand any more of it. Let's go to St. Albans. Nice quiet place, St. Albans." And when they reached St. Albans, there would be that wretched couple kissing under the abbey walls. Then these folks would go and be pirates until the marriage was over. From Picnic Point to Old Windsor Lock is a delightful bit of the river. A shady road, dotted here and there with dainty little cottages, runs by the bank up to the Bells of Owsley, a picturesque inn, as most upriver inns are, and a place where a very good glass of ale may be drunk, so Harris says. And on a matter of this kind you can take Harris's word. Old Windsor is a famous spot in its way. Edward the Confessor had a place here, the palace here even, and here the great Earl Godwin was proved guilty by the justice of that age of having encompassed the death of the king's brother. Earl Godwin broke a piece of bread and held it in his hand. "If I am guilty," said the Earl, "may this bread choke me when I eat it." Then he put the bread into his mouth and swallowed it, and it choked him, and he died. After you pass Old Windsor, the river is somewhat uninteresting, and does not become itself again until you are nearing Boveney. George and I towed up past the Home Park, which stretches along the right bank from Albert to Victoria Bridge, and, as we were passing Datchet, George asked me if I remembered our first trip up the river, and when we landed at Datchet at 10 o'clock at night, he wanted to go to bed. I answered that I did remember it. It will be some time before I forget it. It was the Saturday before the August bank holiday. We were tired and hungry, we same three, and when we got to Datchet we took out the hamper, the 2 bags, and the rugs and coats, and such like things, and started off to look for diggings. We passed a very pretty little hotel, with clematis and creeper over the porch, but there was no honeysuckle about it, and, for some reason or other, I had got my mind fixed on honeysuckle, and I said, "Oh, don't let's go in there, let's go on a bit further and see if there isn't one with honeysuckle over it." So we went on till we came to another hotel. That was a very nice hotel too, and it had honeysuckle on it round at the side. But Harris did not like the look of a man who was leaning against the front door. He said he didn't look a nice man at all, and he wore ugly boots. So we went on further. We went a goodish way without coming across any more hotels, and then we met a man and asked him to direct us to a few. He said, "Why are you coming away from them? You must turn right round and go back, then you will come to the Stag." We said, "Oh, we had been there and didn't like it. No honeysuckle over it." "Well then," he said, "there's the manor house just opposite. Have you tried that?" Harris replied that we did not want to go there. Didn't like the look of a man who was stopping there. Harris did not like the colour of his hair. Didn't like his boots either. "Well, I don't know what you'll do, I'm sure," said our informant, "because they are the only 2 inns at the place." "No other inns?" exclaimed Harris. "None," replied the man. "What on earth are we to do?" cried Harris. Then George spoke up. He said Harris and I could get a hotel built for us if we liked and have some people made to put in. For his part, he was going back to the Stag. The greatest minds never realized their ideals in any matter, and Harris and I sighed over the hollowness of all earthly desires and followed George. We took our traps into the Stag and laid them down in the hall. The landlord came up and said, "Good evening, gentlemen." "Oh, good evening," said George. "We want 3 beds, please." "Very sorry, sir," said the landlord, "but I'm afraid we can't manage it." "Oh, well, never mind," said George. 2 will do. 2 of us can sleep in 1 bed, can't we?" he continued, turning to Harris and me. Harris said, "Oh, yes." He thought George and I could sleep in 1 bed very easily. "Very sorry, sir," again repeated the landlord, "but we really haven't got a bed vacant in the whole house. In fact, we are putting 2 and even 3 gentlemen in 1 bed as it is." This staggered us for a bit, but Harris, who is an old traveller, rose to the occasion and, laughing cheerily, said, "Oh, well, we can't help it. We must rough it. You must give us a shake-down in the billiard room." "Very sorry, sir. 3 gentlemen sleeping on the billiard table already, and 2 in the coffee room. Can't possibly take you in tonight." We picked up our things and went over to the manor house. It was a pretty little place. I said I thought I should like it better than the other house, and Harris said, "Oh, yes, it would be all right, and we needn't look at the man with the red hair." Besides, the poor fellow couldn't help having red hair. Harris spoke quite kindly and sensibly about it. The people at the manor house did not wait to hear us talk. The landlady met us on the doorstep with the greeting that we were 14th party she had turned away within the last hour and a half. As for our meek suggestions of stables, billiard room, or coal cellars, she laughed them all to scorn. All these nooks had been snatched up long ago. Did she know of any place in the whole village where we could get shelter for the night? Well, if we didn't mind roughing it, she did not recommend it, mind, but there was a little beer shop half a mile down the Eton Road. We waited to hear no more. We caught up the hamper and the bags and the coats and rugs and parcels and ran. The distance seemed more like a mile than half a mile, but we reached the place at last and rushed, panting, into the bar. The people at the beer shop were rude. They merely laughed at us. There were only 3 beds in the whole house, and they had 7 single gentlemen and 2 married couples sleeping there already. Excuse me. A kind-hearted bargeman, however, who happened to be in the tap room, thought we might try the grocer's next door to the Stag, and we went back. The grocer's was full. An old woman we met in the shop then kindly took us along with her for a quarter of a mile to a lady friend of hers, who occasionally let rooms to gentlemen. This old woman walked very slowly, and we were 20 minutes getting to her lady friends. She enlivened the journey by describing to us, as we trailed along, the various pains she had in her back. Her lady friends' rooms were let. From there, we were recommended number 27. Number 27 was full and sent us to number 32, and number 32 was full. Then we went back into the high road, and Harris sat down on the hamper and said he would go no farther. He said it seemed a quiet spot and he would like to die there. He requested George and me to kiss his mother for him, and to tell all his relations that he forgave them and died happy. At that moment, an angel came by in the disguise of a small boy, and I cannot think of any more effective disguise an angel could have assumed, with a can of beer in one hand, and in the other something at the end of a string, which he let down onto every flat stone he came across, and then pulled up again, this producing a peculiarly unattractive sound, suggestive of suffering. We asked this heavenly messenger, as we discovered him afterwards to be, if he knew of any lonely house whose occupants were few and feeble, old ladies or paralysed gentlemen preferred, who could be easily frightened into giving up their beds for the night to 3 desperate men. Or, if not this, could he recommend us to an empty pigsty or a disused lime kiln, or anything of that sort? He did not know of any such place, at least not one handy, but he said that, if we liked to come with him, his mother had room to spare, and could put us up for the night. We fell upon his neck there in the moonlight and blessed him, and it would have made a very beautiful picture if the boy himself had not been so overpowered by our emotion as to be unable to sustain himself under it, and sunk to the ground, letting us all down on top of him. Harris was so overcome with joy that he fainted and had to seize the boy's beer can and half empty it before he could recover consciousness, and then he started off at a run and left George and me to bring on the luggage. It was a little 4-roomed cottage where the boy lived, and his mother, good soul, gave us hot bacon for supper, and we ate it all, £5, and a jam tart afterwards, and 2 pots of tea, and then we went to bed. There were 2 beds in the room. One was a 2-foot 6-inch truckle bed, and George and I slept in that, and kept in by tying ourselves together with a sheet. And the other was the little boy's bed, and Harris had that all to himself, and we found him in the morning with 2 feet of bare legs sticking out at the bottom, and George and I used it to hang the towels on while we bathed. We were not so uppish about what sort of hotel we would have next time we went to Datchet. To return to our present trip, nothing exciting happened, and we tugged steadily on to a little below Monkey Island, where we drew up and lunched. We tackled the cold beef for lunch, and then we found that we had forgotten to bring any mustard. I don't think I ever, in my life, before or since, felt I wanted mustard as badly as I felt I wanted it then. I don't care for mustard, as a rule, and it is very seldom that I take it at all, but I would have given worlds for it then. I don't know how many worlds there may be in the universe, but anyone who had brought me a spoonful of mustard at that precise moment could have had them all. I grow reckless like that when I want a thing and can't get it. Harris said he would have given worlds for mustard too. It would have been a good thing for anybody who had come up to that spot with a can of mustard then. He would have been set up in worlds for the rest of his life. But there, I dare say both Harris and I would have tried to back out of the bargain after we had got the mustard. One makes these extravagant offers in moments of excitement, but, of course, when one comes to think of it, one sees how absurdly out of proportion they are with the value of the required article. I heard a man, going up a mountain in Switzerland, once say he would give worlds for a glass of beer, and when he came to a little shanty where they kept it, he kicked up a most fearful row because they charged him 5 francs for a bottle of Bass. He said it was a scandalous imposition, and he wrote to the Times about it. It cast a gloom over the boat, there being no mustard. We ate our beef in silence. Existence seemed hollow and uninteresting. We thought of the happy days of childhood and sighed. We brightened up a bit, however, over the apple tart, and when George drew out a tin of pineapple from the bottom of the hamper and rolled it into the middle of the boat, we felt that life was worth living after all. We are very fond of pineapple, all three of us. We looked at the picture on the tin. We thought of the juice. We smiled at one another, and Harris got a spoon ready. Then we looked for the knife to open the tin with. We turned out everything in the hamper. We turned out the bags. We pulled up the boards at the bottom of the boat. We took everything out onto the bank and shook it. There was no tin opener to be found. Then Harris tried to open the tin with a pocket knife, and broke the knife and cut himself badly. And George tried a pair of scissors, and the scissors flew up and nearly put his eye out. While they were dressing their wounds, I tried to make a hole in the thing with the spiky end of the hitcher, and the hitcher slipped and jerked me out between the boat and the bank into 2 feet of muddy water, and the tin rolled over, uninjured, and broke a teacup. Then we all got mad. We took that tin out on the bank, and Harris went up into a field and got a big sharp stone, and I went back into the boat and brought out the mast, and George held the tin, and Harris held the sharp end of his stone against the top of it, and I took the mast and poised it high up in the air, and gathered up all my strength and brought it down. It was George's straw hat that saved his life that day. He keeps that hat now, what is left of it, and of a winter's evening when the pipes are lit and the boys are telling stretchers about the dangers they have passed through, George brings it down and shows it round, and the stirring tale is told anew, with fresh exaggerations every time. Harris got off with merely a flesh wound. After that, I took the tin off myself and hammered at it with the mast till I was worn out and sick at heart, whereupon Harris took it in hand. We beat it out flat. We beat it back square. We battered it into every form known to geometry, but we could not make a hole in it. Then George went at it and knocked it into a shape so strange, so weird, so unearthly in its wild hideousness that he got frightened and threw away the mast. Then we all three sat round it on the grass and looked at it. There was one great dent across the top that had the appearance of a mocking grin, and it drove us furious, so that Harris rushed at the thing and caught it up and flung it far into the middle of the river. And as it sank we hurled our curses at it, and we got into the boat and rowed away from the spot and never paused till we reached Maidenhead. Maidenhead itself is too snobby to be pleasant. It is the haunt of the river swell and his overdressed female companion. It is the town of showy hotels, patronised chiefly by dudes and ballet girls. It is the witch's kitchen from which go forth those demons of the river, steam launches. The London Journal Duke always has his little place at Maidenhead, and the heroine of the 3-volume novel always dines there when she goes out on the spree with somebody else's husband. We went through Maidenhead quickly, and then eased up and took leisurely that grand reach beyond Bolters and Cookham locks. Cliveden Woods still wore their dainty dress of spring, and rose up from the water's edge in one long harmony of blended shades of fairy green. In its unbroken loveliness this is, perhaps, the sweetest stretch of all the river, and lingeringly we slowly drew our little boat away from its deep peace. We pulled up in the backwater just below Cookham and had tea, and, when we were through the lock, it was evening. A stiffish breeze had sprung up in our favour, for a wonder, for as a rule on the river the wind is always dead against you whatever way you go. It is against you in the morning, when you start for a day's trip, and you pull a long distance, thinking how easy it will be to come back with the sail. Then, after tea, the wind veers round, and you have to pull hard in its teeth all the way home. When you forget to take the sail at all, the wind is consistently in your favour both ways. But there, this world is only a probation, and man was born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. This evening, however, they had evidently made a mistake, and had put the wind round at our back instead of in our face. We kept very quiet about it, and got the sail up quickly before they found it out, and then we spread ourselves about the boat in thoughtful attitudes, and the sail bellied out, and strained, and grumbled at the mast, and the boat flew. I steered. There is no more thrilling sensation I know of than sailing. It comes as near to flying as man has got to yet, except in dreams. The wings of the rushing wind seem to be bearing you onward, you know not where. You are no longer the slow, plodding, puny thing of clay creeping tortuously upon the ground. You are a part of nature. Your heart is throbbing against hers, her glorious arms are round you, raising you up against her heart. Your spirit is at one with hers, your limbs grow light. The voices of the air are singing to you. The earth seems far away and little, and the clouds, so close above your head, are brothers, and you stretch your arms to them. We had the river to ourselves, except that, far in the distance, we could see a fishing punt moored in midstream, on which 3 fishermen sat, and we skimmed over the water, and past the wooded banks, and no one spoke. I was steering. As we drew nearer, we could see that the 3 men fishing seemed old and solemn-looking men. They sat on 3 chairs in the punt and watched intently their lines, and the red sunset threw a mystic light upon the waters, and tinged with fire the towering woods, and made a golden glory of the piled-up clouds. It was an hour of deep enchantment, of ecstatic hope and longing. The little sail stood out against the purple sky. The gloaming lay around us, wrapping the world in rainbow shadows, and behind us crept the night. We seemed like knights of some old legend, sailing across some mystic lake into the unknown realm of twilight, unto the great land of the sunset. We did not go into the realm of twilight. We went slap into that punt where those 3 old men were fishing. We did not know what had happened at first, because the sail shut out the view, but from the nature of the language that rose up upon the evening air, we gathered that we had come into the neighbourhood of human beings, and that they were vexed and discontented. Harris let the sail down, and then we saw what had happened. We had knocked those 3 old gentlemen off their chairs into a general heap at the bottom of the boat, and they were now slowly and painfully sorting themselves out from each other, and picking fish off themselves. And as they worked, they cursed us, not with a common cursory curse, but with long, carefully thought-out, comprehensive curses, that embraced the whole of our career, and went away into the distant future, and included all our relations, and covered everything connected with us. Good, substantial curses. Harris told them they ought to be grateful for a little excitement, sitting there fishing all day, and he also said that he was shocked and grieved to hear men their age give way to temper so. But it did not do any good. George said he would steer after that. He said a mind like mine ought not to be expected to give itself away in steering boats. Better let a mere commonplace human being see after that boat, before we jolly well all got drowned, and he took the lines and brought us up to Marlow. And at Marlow we left the boat by the bridge and went and put up for the night at the Crown. Chapter 13. Marlow, Bisham Abbey. The Medmenham monks. Montmorency thinks he will murder an old tomcat. but eventually decides that he will let it live. Shameful conduct of a fox terrier at the civil service stores. Our departure from Marlow. An imposing procession. The steam launch, useful recipes for annoying and hindering it. We decline to drink the river. A peaceful dog. Strange disappearance of Harris and a pie. Marlow is one of the pleasantest river centres I know of. It is a bustling, lively little town. Not very picturesque on the whole, it is true, but there are many quaint nooks and corners to be found in it nevertheless. Standing arches in the shattered bridge of time, over which our fancy travels back to the days when Marlow Manor owned Saxon Algar for its lord, ere conquering William seized it to give it to Queen Matilda, ere it passed to the Earls of Warwick, or to worldly wise Lord Paget, the counsellor of 4 successive sovereigns. There is lovely country round about it too, if, after boating, you are fond of a walk, while the river itself is at its best here. Down to Cookham, past the quarry woods and the meadows, is a lovely reach. Dear old quarry woods, with your narrow climbing paths and little winding glades, how scented to this hour you seem with memories of sunny summer days. How haunted are your shadowy vistas with the ghosts of laughing faces. How from your whispering leaves there softly fall the voices of long ago. From Marlow up to Sonning is even fairer yet. Grand old Bisham Abbey, whose stone walls have rung to the shouts of the Knights Templars, and which at one time was the home of Anne of Cleves, and at another of Queen Elizabeth, is passed on the right bank just half a mile above Marlow Bridge. Bisham Abbey is rich in melodramatic properties. It contains a tapestry bedchamber and a secret room hid high up in the thick walls. The ghost of the Lady Hoby, who beat her little boy to death, still walks there at night, trying to wash its ghostly hands clean in a ghostly basin. Warwick, the kingmaker, rests there, careless now about such trivial things as earthly kings and earthly kingdoms. And Salisbury, who did good service at Poitiers. Just before you come to the abbey and right on the river's bank is Bisham Church, and, perhaps if any tombs are worth inspecting, they are the tombs and monuments in Bisham Church. It was while floating in his boat under the Bisham beaches that Shelley, who was then living at Marlow, you can see his house now in West Street, composed the Revolt of Islam. By Hurley Weir, a little higher up, I have often thought that I could stay a month without having sufficient time to drink in all the beauty of the scene. The village of Hurley, 5 minutes' walk from the loch, is as old a little spot as there is on the river, dating, as it does, to quote the quaint phraseology of those dim days, from a time of King Sebert and King Offa. Just past the weir, going up, is Danesfield, where the invading Danes once encamped during their march to Gloucestershire, and a little farther off, nestling by a sweet corner of the stream, is what is left of Medmenham Abbey. The famous Medmenham monks, or Hellfire Club as they were commonly called, and of whom the notorious Wilkes was a member, were a fraternity whose motto was, "Do as you please," and that invitation still stands over the ruined doorway of the abbey. Many years before this bogus abbey, with its congregation of irreverent jesters, was founded, there stood upon this same spot a monastery of a sterner kind, whose monks were of a somewhat different type to the revellers that were to follow them 500 years afterwards. The Cistercian monks, whose abbey stood there in the 13th century, wore no clothes but rough tunics and cowls, and ate no flesh, nor fish, nor eggs. They lay upon straw, and they rose at midnight to mass. They spent the day in labour, reading and prayer, and over all their lives there fell a silence as of death, for no one spoke. A grim fraternity, passing grim lives in that sweet spot that God had made so bright. Strange that nature's voices all around them, the soft singing of the waters, the whisperings of the river grass, the music of the rushing wind, should not have taught them a truer meaning of life than this. They listened there, through the long days, in silence, waiting for a voice from heaven, and all day long and through the solemn night it spoke to them in myriad tones, and they heard it not. From Medmenham to Sweet Hambledon Loch the river is full of peaceful beauty, but after it passes Greenlands, the rather uninteresting-looking river residence of my newsagent, a quiet, unassuming old gentleman, who may often be met with about these regions during the summer months, sculling himself along in easy vigorous style or chatting genially to some old lock-keeper as he passes through, until well the other side of Henley it is somewhat bare and dull. We got up tolerably early on the Monday morning at Marlow, and went for a bathe before breakfast, and, coming back, Montmorency made an awful ass of himself. The only subject on which Montmorency and I have any serious difference of opinion is cats. I like cats. Montmorency does not. When I meet a cat, I say, "Poor pussy," and stoop down and tickle the side of its head, and the cat sticks up its tail in a rigid cast-iron manner, arches its back, and wipes its nose up against my trousers, and all is gentleness and peace. When Montmorency meets a cat, the whole street knows about it, and there is enough bad language wasted in 10 seconds to last an ordinary respectable man all his life with care. I do not blame the dog, contenting myself, as a rule, with merely clouting his head or throwing stones at him, because I take it that it is his nature. Fox terriers are born with about 4 times as much original sin in them as other dogs are, and it will take years and years of patient effort on the part of us Christians to bring about any appreciable reformation in the rowdiness of the fox terrier nature. I remember being in the lobby of the Haymarket stores one day, and all round about me were dogs waiting for the return of their owners who were shopping inside. There were a mastiff, and 1 or 2 collies, and a St. Bernard, a few retrievers and Newfoundlands, a boarhound, a French poodle, with plenty of hair round its head, but mangy about the middle, a bulldog, a few Lowther Arcade sort of animals about the size of rats, and a couple of Yorkshire tykes. There they sat, patient, good and thoughtful. A solemn peacefulness seemed to reign in that lobby. An air of calmness and resignation, of gentle sadness, pervaded the room. Then a sweet young lady entered, leading a meek-looking little fox terrier, and left him chained up there between the bulldog and the poodle. He sat and looked about him for a minute. Then he cast up his eyes to the ceiling, and seemed, judging from his expression, to be thinking of his mother. Then he yawned. Then he looked round at the other dogs, all silent, grave, and dignified. He looked at the bulldog, sleeping dreamlessly on his right. He looked at the poodle, erect and haughty on his left. Then, without a word of warning, without the shadow of a provocation, he bit that poodle's near foreleg, and a yelp of agony ran through the quiet shades of that lobby. The result of his first experiment seemed highly satisfactory to him, and he determined to go on and make things lively all round. He sprang over the poodle and vigorously attacked a collie, and the collie woke up and immediately commenced a fierce and noisy contest with the poodle. Then Foxy came back to his own place and caught the bulldog by the ear and tried to throw him away, and the bulldog, a curiously impartial animal, went for everything he could reach, including the hall-porser, which gave that dear little terrier the opportunity to enjoy an uninterrupted fight of his own with an equally willing Yorkshire tyke. Anyone who knows canine nature need hardly be told that, by this time, all the other dogs in the place were fighting as if their hearths and homes depended on the fray. The big dogs fought each other indiscriminately, and the little dogs fought among themselves and filled up their spare time by biting the legs of the big dogs. The whole lobby was a perfect pandemonium, and the din was terrific. A crowd assembled outside in the Haymarket and asked if it was a vestry meeting, or, if not, who was being murdered and why. Men came with poles and ropes and tried to separate the dogs, and the police were sent for. And in the midst of the riot, that sweet young lady returned and snatched up that sweet little dog of hers. He had laid the tyke-up for a month and had the expression now of a newborn lamb, into her arms and kissed him and asked him if he was killed and what those great nasty brutes of dogs had been doing to him. And he nestled up against her and gazed up into her face with a look that seemed to say, "Oh, I'm so glad you've come to take me away from this disgraceful scene." She said that the people at the stores had no right to allow great savage things like those other dogs to be put with respectable people's dogs, and that she had a great mind to summon somebody. Such is the nature of fox terriers, and therefore I do not blame Montmorency for his tendency to row with cats, but he wished he had not given way to it that morning. We were, as I have said, returning from a dip, and halfway up the high street a cat darted out from one of the houses in front of us, and began to trot across the road. Montmorency gave a cry of joy, the cry of a stern warrior who sees his enemy given over to his hands, the sort of cry Cromwell might have uttered when the Scots came down the hill and flew after his prey. His victim was a large black tom. I never saw a larger cat, nor a more disreputable-looking cat. It had lost half its tail, one of its ears, and a fairly appreciable proportion of its nose. It was a long, sinewy-looking animal. It had a calm, contented air about it. Montmorency went for that poor cat at a rate of 20 miles an hour, but the cat did not hurry up. It did not seem to have grasped the idea that its life was in danger. It trotted quietly on until its would-be assassin was within a yard of it, and then it turned round and sat down in the middle of the road and looked at Montmorency with a gentle, inquiring expression that said, "Yes, you want me?" Montmorency does not lack pluck, but there was something about the look of the cat that might have chilled the heart of the boldest dog. He stopped abruptly and looked back at the tom. Neither spoke, but the conversation that one could imagine was clearly as follows. The cat. "Can I do anything for you?" Montmorency. No, thanks." The cat. "Don't you mind speaking if you really want anything, you know." Montmorency, backing down the high street. "Oh, no, not at all, certainly. Don't trouble. I'm afraid I made a mistake. I thought I knew you. Sorry I disturbed you." The cat. "Not at all, quite a pleasure. Sure you don't want anything now?" Montmorency, still backing. "Not at all, thanks. Not at all. Very kind of you. Good morning." The cat. "Good morning." Then the cat rose and continued his trot, and Montmorency, fitting what he calls his tail carefully into its groove, came back to us and took up an unimportant position in the rear. To this day, if you say the word "cats" to Montmorency, he will visibly shrink and look up piteously at you, as if to say, "Please don't." We did our marketing after breakfast, and we victualled the boat for 3 days. George said we ought to take vegetables, that it was unhealthy not to eat vegetables. He said they were easy enough to cook, and that he would see to that. So we got 10 pounds of potatoes, a bushel of peas, and a few cabbages. We got a beefsteak pie, a couple of gooseberry tarts, and a leg of mutton from the hotel, and fruit, and cakes, and bread, and butter, and jam, and bacon, and eggs, and other things we foraged round about the town for. Our departure from Marlow I regard as one of our greatest successes. It was dignified and impressive without being ostentatious. We had insisted at all the shops that we had been to that the things should be sent with us then and there. None of your, "Yes, sir, I will send them off at once, the boy will be down there before you are, sir," and then fooling about on the landing stage and going back to the shop twice to have a row about them for us. We waited while the basket was packed and took the boy with us. We went to a good many shops, adopting this principle at each one, and the consequence was that, by the time we had finished, we had as fine a collection of boys with baskets following us around as heart could desire, and our final march down the middle of the high street to the river must have been as imposing a spectacle as Marlowe had seen for many a long day. The order of the procession was as follows: Montmorency, carrying a stick. 2 disreputable-looking curs, friends of Montmorency's. George, carrying coats and rugs and smoking a short pipe. Harris, trying to walk with easy grace while carrying a bulged-out Gladstone bag in one hand and a bottle of lime juice in the other. Greengrocer's boy and baker's boy, with baskets. Boots from the hotel, carrying hamper. Confectioner's boy, with basket. Grocer's boy, with basket. Long-haired dog. Cheesemonger's boy, with basket. Old man carrying a bag. Bosom companion of odd man carrying a bag. Bosom companion of odd man, with his hands in his pockets, smoking a short clay. Fruiterer's boy, with basket. Myself, carrying 3 hats and a pair of boots and trying to look as if I didn't know it. 6 small boys and 4 stray dogs. When we got down to the landing stage, the boatman said, "Let me see, sir, was yours a steam launch or a houseboat?" On our informing him that it was a double-sculling skiff, he seemed surprised. We had a good deal of trouble with steam launches that morning. It was just before the Henley week, and they were going up in large numbers, some by themselves, some towing houseboats. I do hate steam launches. I suppose every rowing man does. I never see a steam launch, but I feel I should like to lure it into a lonely part of the river, and there, in the silence and the solitude, strangle it. There is a blatant bumptiousness about a steam launch that has the knack of rousing every evil instinct in my nature, and I yearn for the good old days when you could go about and tell people what you thought of them with a hatchet and a bow and arrows. The expression on the face of the man who, with his hands in his pockets, stands by the stern, smoking a cigar, is sufficient to excuse a breach of the peace by itself, and the lordly whistle for you to get out of the way would, I am confident, ensure a verdict of justifiable homicide from any jury of rivermen. They used to have to whistle for us to get out of the way. If I may do so without appearing boastful, I think I can honestly say that our one small boat, during that week, caused more annoyance and delay and aggravation to the steam launches that we came across than all the other craft on the river put together. "Steam launch coming!" one of us would cry out on sighting the enemy in the distance, and in an instant everything was got ready to receive her. I would take the lines, and Harris and George would sit down beside me, all of us with our backs to the launch, and the boat would drift out quietly into midstream. On would come the launch, whistling, and on we would go, drifting. At about 100 yards off, she would start whistling like mad, and the people would come and lean over the side and roar at us, but we never heard them. Harris would be telling us an anecdote about his mother, and George and I would not have missed a word of it for worlds. Then that launch would give one final shriek of a whistle that would nearly burst the boiler, and she would reverse her engines and blow off steam and swing round and get aground. Everyone on board of it would rush to the bow and yell at us, and the people on the bank would stand and shout at us. And all the other passing boats would stop and join in, till the whole river for miles up and down was in a state of frantic commotion. And then Harris would break off in the most interesting part of his narrative, and look up with mild surprise and say to George, "Why, George, bless us if here isn't a steam launch!" And George would answer, "Well, do you know, I thought I heard something." Upon which we would get nervous and confused and not know how to get the boat out of the way, and the people in the launch would crowd round and instruct us. "Pull your right, You idiot! Pull back with your left. No, not you, the other one. Leave the lines alone, can't you? Now, both together. Not that way. Oh, you... And then they would lower a boat and come to our assistance, and after a quarter of an hour's effort would get us clean out of their way so that they could go on, and we would thank them so much and ask them to give us a tow. But they never would. Another good way we discovered of irritating the aristocratic type of steam launch was to mistake them for a bean feast and ask them if they were Messrs. Cubitt's lot, or the Bermondsey Good Templars, and could they lend us a saucepan. Old ladies not accustomed to the river are always intensely nervous of steam launches. I remember going up once from Staines to Windsor, a stretch of water peculiarly rich in these mechanical monstrosities, with a party containing 3 ladies of this description. It was very exciting. At the first glimpse of every steam launch that came in view, they insisted on landing and sitting down on the bank until it was out of sight. They said they were very sorry, but that they owed it to their families not to be foolhardy. We found ourselves short of water at Hambledon Lock, so we took our jar and went up to the lockkeeper's house to beg for some. George was our spokesman. He put on a winning smile and said, "Oh, please could you spare us a little water?" "Certainly," replied the old gentleman. "Take as much as you want and leave the rest." "Thank you so much," murmured George, looking about him. Where do you keep it?" "It's always in the same place, my boy," was the stolid reply. "Just behind you." "I don't see it," said George, turning round. "Why, bless us, where's your eyes?" was the man's comment, as he twisted George around and pointed up and down the stream. "There's enough of it to see, ain't there?" "Oh!" exclaimed George, grasping his idea. "But we can't drink the river, you know." "No, but you can drink some of it," replied the old fellow. "It's what I've drunk for the last 15 years. George told him that his appearance after the course did not seem a sufficiently good advertisement for the brand, and that he would prefer it out of a pump. We got some from the cottage a little higher up. I dare say that was only river water if we had known, but we did not know, so it was all right. What the eye does not see, the stomach does not get upset over. We tried river water once, later on in the season, but it was not a success. We were coming downstream and had pulled up to have tea in a backwater near Windsor. Our jar was empty, and it was a case of going without our tea or taking water from the river. Harris was for chancing it. He said it must be all right if we boiled the water. He said that the various germs of poison present in the water would be killed by the boiling. So we filled our kettle with Thames backwater and boiled it, and very careful we were to see that it did boil. We had made tea, and were just settling down comfortably to drink it, when George, with his cup halfway to his lips, paused and exclaimed, "What's that?" "What's what?" asked Harris and I. "Why, that," said George, looking westward. Harris and I followed his gaze, and saw coming down towards us on the sluggish current a dog. It was one of the quietest and peacefulest dogs I have ever seen. I never met a dog who seemed more contented, more easy in its mind. It was floating dreamily on its back, with its 4 legs stuck up into the air. It was what I should call a full-bodied dog with a well-developed chest. On he came, serene, dignified, and calm, until he was abreast of our boat, and there, among the rushes, he eased up and settled down cosily for the evening. George said he didn't want any tea, and emptied his cup into the water. Harris did not feel thirsty either, and followed suit. I had drunk half mine, but I wished I had not. I asked George if he thought I was likely to have typhoid. He said, "Oh no, he thought I had a very good chance indeed of escaping it. Anyhow, I should know in about a fortnight whether I had it or not." We went up the backwater to Wargrave. It is a shortcut, leading out of the right-hand bank about half a mile above Marsh Lock, and is well worth taking, being a pretty, shady little piece of stream, besides saving nearly half a mile of distance. Of course, its entrance is studded with posts and chains, and surrounded with notice boards menacing all kinds of torture, imprisonment, and death to everyone who dares set skull upon its waters. I wonder some of those riparian boars don't claim the air of the river and threaten everyone with 40 shillings fine who breathes it. But the posts and chains a little skill will easily avoid. And as for the boards, you might, if you have 5 minutes to spare and there is nobody about, take 1 or 2 of them down and throw them into the river. Halfway up the backwater we got out and lunched, and it was during this that George and I received a rather trying shock. Harris received a shock too, but I do not think Harris's shock could have been anything like so bad as the shock that George and I had over the business. You see, it was in this way. We were sitting in a meadow, about 10 yards from the water's edge, and we had just settled down comfortably to feed. Harris had the beefsteak pie between his knees and was carving it, and George and I were waiting with our plates ready. "Have you got a spoon there?" says Harris. "I want a spoon to help the gravy with." The hamper was close behind us, and George and I both turned round to reach one out. We were not 5 seconds getting it when we looked round again, Harris and the pie were gone. It was a wide open field. There was not a tree or a bit of hedge for hundreds of yards. He could not have tumbled into the river because we were on the water side of him, and he would have had to climb over us to do it. George and I gazed all about. Then we gazed at each other. "Has he been snatched up to heaven?" I queried. "They'd hardly have taken the pie too," said George. There seemed weight in this objection, and we discarded the heavenly theory. "I suppose the truth of the matter is," suggested George, descending to the commonplace and practicable, "that there has been an earthquake." And then, he added with a touch of sadness in his voice, "I wish he hadn't been carving that pie." With a sigh, we turned our eyes once more towards the spot where Harris and the pie had last been seen on earth. And there, as our blood froze in our veins and our hair stood up on end, we saw Harris's head, and nothing but his head, sticking bolt upright among the tall grass, the face very red and bearing upon it an expression of great indignation. George was the first to recover. "Speak!" he cried, "and tell us whether you are alive or dead, and where is the rest of you?" "Oh, don't be a stupid ass," said Harris's head. "I believe you did it on purpose." "Did what?" exclaimed George and I. "Why, put me to sit here, darn silly trick. Here, catch hold of the pie." And out of the middle of the earth, as it seemed to us, rose the pie, very much mixed up and damaged, and after it scrambled Harris, tumbled, grubby and wet. He had been sitting, without knowing it, on the very verge of a small gully, the long grass hiding it from view, and in leaning a little back he had shot over, pie and all. He said he had never felt so surprised in all his life as when he first felt himself going, without being able to conjecture in the slightest what had happened. He thought first that the end of the world had come. Harris believes to this day that George and I planned it all beforehand. Thus does unjust suspicion follow even the most blameless, for, as the poet says, who shall escape calumny? Who indeed? And that, I'm sorry to say, brings us to the end of the chapter and where we shall finish reading for tonight. Thank you for listening. Normal human men having a normal human man trip up the river. I don't know. Yeah, you're welcome, everybody. I am enjoying this book. It is very fun to read. It is very readable. I'm enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying it. It's a good time. I would actually. I folded a page while I was reading it. Well, not a whole page, a corner of a page, because like for all the so extremely purple prose digressions that he gets off into, there was actually one that I was like, I quite like this. This is actually nice, and I'm just going back to try and find it now. Yeah, it's where he was talking about the Cistercian monks. I'm just going to read the whole paragraph. A grim fraternity, passing grim lives in that sweet spot that God had made so bright. Strange that nature's voices all around them, the soft singing of the waters, the whisperings of the river grass, the music of the rushing wind, should not have taught them a truer meaning of life than this. They listened there, through the long days, in silence, waiting for a voice from heaven, and all day long and through the solemn night it spoke to them in myriad tones, and they heard it not. Like, I actually, genuinely, to me, that's a really... I love that sentiment, like the way that it's put, the way that it's written and conveyed. I really like that. That you've got this sort of order of monks who effectively, like, they punish themselves every day for existing, and they live in silence, to better hear the word of God around them, regardless of your take on religion. And it's like, and just, I don't know, just this idea that, well, yeah, it's all there, it's around them, it's in the sounds of nature, these the beautiful sounds of the river grass, the music of the rushing winds, the soft singing of the waters. Like, you've got all these sounds around them, and they're just ignoring it because they're listening for something else. Like that, I don't know, I like that sentiment, that actually, yeah, I unironically enjoy that bit, as opposed to just like, oh yeah, this guy's a bit of a, I don't know, he fancies his words a little bit too much. Good night, Lynn, thank you for being here. Yeah. Oh, yes, that is where we are now. I suppose the monk's logic would be that they're being quiet the better to appreciate all those things. I guess, yeah. Yes, again, as ever, there are multiple perspectives from which to view these things. But yeah, I hope that everyone is still enjoying this. I did see also there was a resub. Mola fan, thank you. Oh, hello, thank you for the resub. It is good to see you, and I hope that you are well. But yeah, I don't know what sort of. Does anyone want to talk about things before we go, or do we just bounce? Yo. The bit with Montmorency and the cat, I enjoyed. I worried because there was, right when he's being introduced at the very start of the book, we are told that he's probably killed a cat, and I was like, no, you don't do it. But when Jerome says, like, I like cats, Montmorency does not. Like, okay, the cat's probably going to get out of this one okay. Oh, yes, it does. I enjoyed that exchange. The shameful conduct of a fox terrier at the civil service stalls, good. The whole bit with a tin of pineapple, I enjoyed the punchline of it was George's straw hat that saved his life that day. I think that was a very good setup, and like, you can see where it's going when he talks about I went and got the mast. And just the whole setup, like, you know how this is going to end. You know, frankly, in every scenario that he starts off on a tangent, and there's so many tangents, you know that it will end in some sort of disaster. But even at like this stage in the book, to still be able to like set those up and deliver on those punchlines is, yeah, it's a challenge, it's a task. It's high quality chaos. Oh yeah. But yeah, I guess what we should do is leave, is finish, that's a shame. I really wanted to raid over to Adam to see Bats, because he was playing Street Fighter earlier, Street Fighter 6, and made the rank of Master, and genuinely it was really lovely, because like firstly the fight that he was doing that like took him over that rank was a really clean, pristine fight, and then like actually seeing him get completely emotionally overwhelmed by achieving this goal was it was really lovely, and I wanted to like raid over and say hello and congratulations and stuff, but he has gone offline. So what I will do, there is maybe I was going to check the reading aloud tag. Right, Molivant? Yeah, it's really cool. Like he's done. I say condescendingly as someone who just started playing the game for the first time yesterday. He's done really well. Is there someone to raid over to on the reading aloud tag? You're just playing video games. No. I mean, yes. But no, that's cheating. No. Okay. I see that Cam is on. We could go and introduce ourselves to Cam. Another member of the Loading Ready Run team. Nice guy. Good guy. Because nice guy has connotations. Not that kind of nice guy. Good guy. Who is playing Civ 6. Okay, so yeah, let us go and introduce ourselves to I guess a new friend, really. Yeah, let's do that. Let us raid Unarmed Oracle, which is an anagram of his name. It's very good. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, Parola, and everyone else who has said thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here. We will be back on Wednesday. And yeah, Lucy will be reading more things. We may have more updates on some sort of place that we are fleeing to after the Twitter debacle. We probably, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm actively trying to find new places that aren't Twitter, and so should everyone else be. But yeah, we'll keep you posted here. This is, of course, like the best place to find us for now. Yes, we will have a chat about Discord, and maybe, I don't know, maybe then, maybe soon after. I'm not sure. We will see. But yes, thank you all for being here. Let's get the raid started. And we will see you then on the next one. Thank you all for being here, and yeah, goodbye and good night.